The Battle of San Jacinto, fought on April 21, 1836, in present-day Harris County, Texas, was the decisive battle of the Texas Revolution. Led by General Sam Houston, the Texian Army engaged and defeated General Antonio López de Santa Anna's Mexican army in a fight that lasted just 18 minutes. About 630 of the Mexican soldiers were killed and 730 captured, while only 9 Texans died. Santa Anna, the president of Mexico, was captured the following day and held as a prisoner of war. 3 weeks later, he signed the peace treaty that dictated that the Mexican army leave the region, paving the way for the Republic of Texas to become an independent country. These treaties did not specifically recognize Texas as a sovereign nation, but stipulated that Santa Anna was to lobby for such recognition in Mexico City. Sam Houston became a national celebrity, and the Texans' rallying cries, "Remember the Alamo," and "Remember Goliad," became etched into Texas history and legend. Background: Colonization. During the early years of Mexican independence, numerous American immigrants had settled in Mexican Texas, then a part of the state of Coahuila y Tejas, with the Mexican government's encouragement. Political turmoil and civil war. In 1835, they rebelled against the Mexican government of Santa Anna because he rescinded the Democratic Constitution of 1824, dissolved Mexico's Congress and state legislatures, and asserted dictatorial control over the nation. After capturing military outposts and defeating the Mexican army garrisons in the area, the Texans drove the remaining Mexican forces from Texas after a siege and a major confrontation in San Antonio. Texans then formed a provisional government and drafted a Declaration of Independence. Hundreds of volunteers from the United States of America headed into the fledgling Republic of Texas to assist in its quest for independence. 2 full regiments of these volunteers were soon organized to augment the regular Texas Army. Other volunteers organized into companies to defend places that might be targets of Mexican intervention. Some of the American volunteers at San Jacinto included the Kentucky Rifles, a company raised in Cincinnati and northern Kentucky by Sidney Sherman, and one of the few units in the Texian militia with formal uniforms. The New Orleans Greys, another company raised in the United States, had fought at the Battle of the Alamo while serving under a regular Texas Army officer, while 2 companies from Alabama fought at Goliad. Mexican Response. In 1836, Santa Anna led a force of about 6,000 Mexican troops into what is now Texas to put down the insurrection. He first entered San Antonio de Bexar and, after a 13-day siege, defeated and killed the Texan force on March 6, 1836 at the Alamo. The right wing of Santa Anna's offensive, under General José de Urrea, then defeated, captured, and executed the survivors of a second force near Goliad. Santa Anna ordered the Goliad prisoners to be shot or bayoneted on March 27, Palm Sunday. General Urrea resisted the orders at first and sent a special message to Santa Anna to confirm the order, which Santa Anna upheld. After granting clemency to those prisoners of war who had surrendered unarmed, Urrea approached the problem of how to execute over 300 prisoners. To do so, those who were able to walk were told that they were being moved under guard to a new location. As the prisoners were being led down the road in 3 columns, between 2 lines of guards, the Mexican soldiers opened fire. Out of 303 Texian prisoners, 28 escaped, of which 6 were able to carry the tale to Sam Houston's militia. Of the remaining 40 Texians who were unable to walk, 39 were shot and killed in the fort after the others had left. This execution of 342 prisoners of war became known as the Goliad Massacre. At the Battle of San Jacinto, both the cries of "Remember the Alamo" and "Remember Goliad" were heard. The fortress where the prisoners were held is today in excellent repair and is the finest example of a Mexican fort in the United States. It is called Presidio La Bahia and is near present-day Goliad, Texas. Texan Response. Soldiers and militia had again assembled in Gonzales. Colonel James Neal had taken charge and started to organize the troops. Houston soon arrived and assumed command of what was now the main Texian Army. Seeking a more defensible position, he slowly retreated eastward. To President David G. Burnett, no admirer of Houston's, Houston appeared unwilling to fight his pursuer, despite Burnett's frequent orders for Houston to do so. Texas settlers jeered Houston as he passed, and his officers threatened to seize command. Houston in reply said he would shoot anyone who tried. Concerned that the Mexican army was rapidly approaching unchecked, Burnet and the Texas government abandoned the provisional capital at Washington on the Brazos and moved towards the Gulf of Mexico, re-establishing key governmental functions in Harrisburg and later Galveston. In their wake, thousands of panicked colonists fled in what became popularly known as the Runaway Scrape. Houston initially headed toward the Sabine River, the border with the United States, where a federal army under General Pendleton Gaines had assembled to protect Louisiana if Santa Anna decided to invade the U.S. However, Houston soon turned to southeast toward Harrisburg. After the Battle of the Alamo, while still at Bear, Santa Anna had devised his three-pronged plan, pursuing Houston's army directly from the center with flanks to the north and south. However, in mid-April, Santa Anna abandoned the plan in an attempt to capture the fleeing Texas government at Morgan's Point, about a half-day's march below Lynch's Ferry. Santa Anna personally led a picket column of about 900 troops, but failed to encounter the sought-after leaders. On April 20th, he then counter-marched toward Lynch's Ferry, where Houston's army had, earlier that morning, established a position in the woods along the confluence of the San Jacinto River and Buffalo Bayou. Santa Anna began setting up camp and defenses on a grassy field 1,000 yards below the Texans' position. Prelude to Battle. Believing Houston to be cornered, Santa Anna decided to rest his army on April 19 and attack on April 22. On April 20, Texian and Mexican patrols clashed at New Washington. Santa Anna knew Houston was nearby and sent a probe into the woods to find his army. Colonel James C. Neal commanded the Twin Sisters during the battle and sent the Mexicans promptly into retreat, saving the Texians from discovery. Neal was seriously wounded when a fragment of a Mexican grapeshot caught him in the hip. J.C. Neal was then replaced by G.W. Hockley. Mexican Captain Ertz was also wounded. On the afternoon of April 20, Colonel Sidney Sherman, accompanied by a detachment of cavalry, engaged the Mexican infantry, almost bringing on some major action when they were counterattacked by Mexican lancers. Captain Jesse Billingsley came to their aid and the entire regiment under Colonel Burleson promptly joined in. The Mexicans were repulsed and Houston called for the Texians to fall back. 2 Texans were wounded, Walter Lane and Olwen J. Trask, with several horses also being killed. Private Mirabeau B. Lamar, from Georgia, performed so bravely, first saving Thomas J. Rusk and later Walter Lane. He was promoted to colonel and placed in command of the cavalry. On the morning of April 21, Santa Anna received roughly 500 reinforcements under General Martin Prefecto de Cuz. His total strength now approached 1,400 men. Santa Anna posted Cuz to his right, near the river, and posted his last artillery in the center, erecting a 5-foot-high barricade of packs and baggage as hastily constructed protection for his infantry. He placed his veteran cavalry on his left flank and settled back to plan the following day's attack. At noon on April 21, Houston held a council of war. Pro-Houston versions of the meeting say the majority of his officers favored waiting for Santa Anna's eventual assault. The conference lingered on for 2 hours. Houston, however, decided in favor of his own surprise attack that afternoon, concerned that Santa Anna might use the extra time to concentrate his scattered army. Most of the assault would come over open ground, where the Texan infantry would be vulnerable to Mexican gunfire. Even riskier, Houston decided to outflank the Mexicans with his cavalry, stretching his troops even thinner. However, Santa Anna made a crucial mistake. During his army's afternoon siesta, he failed to post sentries or skirmishers around his camp. The 900-strong Texian Army was ready to meet the enemy. Houston, urged by Texas Secretary of War Thomas J. Rusk, who had caught up with the militia to consult with Houston at the insistence of President Burnet, began the action. By 3:30 p.m., Houston had formed his men into battle lines for the impending assault, screened from Mexican view by trees and by a slight ridge that ran across the open prairie between the opposing armies. Santa Anna's failure to properly post lookouts proved fatal to his chances of victory. Battle. At 4:30 p.m. on April 21, Scout Def Smith announced the burning of Vince's Bridge, which cut off the only avenue of reinforcement and retreat for both armies without having to cross water more than 10 feet deep. The main Texan battle line moved forward with their approach screened by the trees and rising ground. Emerging from the woods, the order was given to advance and a fifer began playing the popular tune "Will You Come to the Bower I Have Shaded for You?" General Houston personally led the infantry, posting the 2nd Volunteer Regiment of Colonel Sidney Sherman together with Juan Seguin's men on his far left, with Colonel Edward Burleson's 1st Volunteer Regiment next in line. In the center, 2 small brass smoothbore artillery pieces known as the Twin Sisters were wheeled forward under the command of Major George W. Hockley. They were supported by 4 companies of infantry under Captain Henry Wax Carnes. Colonel Henry Millard's Regiment of Texas Regulars made up the right wing. To the extreme far right, 61 Texas cavalrymen under newly promoted Colonel Mirabeau B. Lamar planned to circle into the Mexicans' left flank. The Texan militia moved quickly and silently across the high grass plain, and then, when they were only a few dozen yards away, charged Santa Anna's camp, shouting "Remember the Alamo!" and "Remember Goliad," only stopping a few yards from the Mexicans to open fire. Manuel Flores is credited for taking the lead in the charge against Santa Anna's army. José María Rodríguez states in his book, Memoirs of Early Texas, that during the charge, the Texans fired and fell to the ground expecting a volley from the Mexican camp, but Flores remained standing and challenged the Texian Army to get up and advance, for Santa Anna's men are running. Thomas Rusk also galloped up to the men shouting, "Don't stop. Give 'em hell." The Texans achieved complete surprise. A bold attack in broad daylight, its success can be attributed in good part to Santa Anna's relaxed vigilance due to the superior number of forces he now possessed. Santa Anna's army primarily consisted of professional soldiers, but they were trained to fight in ranks, exchanging volleys with their opponents. The Mexicans were ill-prepared and unarmed at the time of the sudden attack. Most were asleep with their saudadras, worn out from building fortifications. Some were out gathering wood, and the cavalrymen were riding bareback fetching water. Not all were unaware. Colonel Delgado was concerned with the laxness, and General Manuel Fernandez Castrillion, who at the Alamo had tried to save a small band of Texian defenders, desperately tried to mount an organized resistance, but was soon shot down and killed. His panicked troops fled, and Santa Anna's defensive line quickly collapsed. Hundreds of the demoralized and confused Mexican soldiers were routed, with many being driven into the marshes along the river to drown. The Texans chased after the fleeing enemy, Deaf Smith shouting "Take prisoners like the Mexicans do," in reference to the burning of bodies after the Alamo and the mass murder of Texans at Goliad. Some of the Mexican cavalry plunged into the flooded stream by Vince's Bridge, but they were shot as they struggled in the water. Houston tried to restrain his men, but was ignored. General Juan Almonte, commanding what was left of the organized Mexican resistance, soon formally surrendered his 400 remaining men to Rusk. The rest of Santa Anna's once proud army had disintegrated into chaos. From the moment of the first charge, the battle was a slaughter, frightful to behold, with most of the Texan casualties coming in the first minutes of battle from the first Mexican volley. During the short but furious fighting, Houston was shot in the left ankle, 2 of his horses were shot from under him, and Santa Anna escaped. The combat itself lasted 18 minutes, but the slaughter of the Mexicans continued for another hour or so. The Texan militia had won a stunning victory, killing about 700 Mexican soldiers, wounding 208, and taking 730 prisoners, including Santa Anna, while suffering 9 killed and 30 wounded. Aftermath. Santa Anna disappeared during the battle and evaded discovery by shedding his ornate uniform for that of a common soldier. A search party consisting of James A. Sylvester, Washington H. Seacrest, Sion R. Bostick, and Mr. Cole was sent out the next morning. When surrounded in high grass and compelled to surrender, Santa Anna was initially thought to be a common soldier. However, when saluted as El Presidente by other prisoners, his true identity was discovered by the Texans. Houston spared his life, preferring to negotiate an end to the overall hostilities and the withdrawal from Texas of Santa Anna's remaining columns. On May 14, 1836, Santa Anna signed the treaties of Velasco, in which he agreed to withdraw his troops from Texan soil and, in exchange for safe conduct back to Mexico, lobby there for recognition of the new republic. There were 2 treaties, a private treaty and a public treaty. In the private treaty, Santa Anna pledged to try to persuade Mexico to acknowledge Texas independence, in return for an escort back to Mexico. However, the safe passage never materialized. Santa Anna was held for 6 months as a prisoner of war and finally taken to Washington, D.C. There he met with President Andrew Jackson, before finally returning in disgrace to Mexico in early 1837. The independent Republic of Texas received diplomatic recognition from the United States, France, Belgium, the Netherlands, and the Republic of Yucatan. Even after the Republic had joined the United States in 1845, Mexico still maintained claims on Texas until the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo ended the Mexican-American War in 1848.